我吗？我觉得蛮乐观的。
我是一个逗逼，
对生活充满好奇，
有道德、有理想的人。
They were born in the 1990s. They make up 1/5 of China's population. If they had their own country, it would be the 5th most populous on Earth. Today, the oldest of China's post-90s generation are old enough to be 3 years out of college. Who are they? Which careers and dreams are they pursuing?
给你30秒。
Members of the charity Raleigh are playing icebreaker games to prepare for their summer expedition. Raleigh leads trips that engage young people in local sustainable development. Many trip applicants were born in the 1990s.
我就是想锻炼一下自己，看我自己的极限到底在哪里。
Our online survey reveals, for a vast majority of post-90s, travel is the top choice for gap year. That enthusiasm is shared with their peers around the world, as young people now represent 1/5 of total international travelers. Given the amount of passionate young explorers, what better way to get to know them than through a conversation about travel?
All right, welcome to Culture Matters. Today, interesting topic. Now, some say that to travel is to take a trip into your heart. And today, as we seek to understand the hearts and minds of the 90s-born generation in China, let's do so firstly by asking them about how they choose to travel and explore the world. Our first group of young explorers are Jonathan, April, and Alex. Let's take a look at this video profile on their adventures.
April Xie is a college student who has made several trips abroad as a volunteer teacher. Her trips usually last several months and rely on cultural exchange with local populations. Jonathan Gao is a high school student with a passion for travel photography. The photos he has taken on trips abroad have earned him awards from a young age. Alex Rexak is a young man interested in the old. A self-described history geek, his favorite travel destinations have historical significance.
So let's meet Jonathan, April, and Alex. Join me on stage. So April, nice to meet you. Alex, nice to have you here. Take a seat.
Thank you.
So we ran on our, social networking channel. We asked our followers, what do they think about the best way to spend their gap year? And not surprisingly, more than 80% of the respondents said, mainly young respondents, said is to travel. So, all of you seem to be very keen on traveling. Is that really popular among your friends also? Of your generation, that is.
For me, I would take my camera with my dad. We went to different places. Also, in the past summer, I traveled to Guizhou with the rally. It was a great experience. Besides photography, we also can do charity.
Right.
While traveling.
So it's traveling with a sense of purpose, isn't it?
Yes.
It's not just to travel.
Not just travel. Because only sightseeing or just taking photos with yeah. That's not, for me, it's not travel.
Hey, it's not yay anymore. It's selfie now.
Oh yeah, selfie with a stick though.
Yes.
Selfie stick, yeah.
The way how we travel is totally different from our parent generation.
Yeah.
For me, I'll never go to the tourist agencies.
Okay.
And instead, we make the traveling plans by ourselves. Some of my friends, they used an app called Couchsurfing. Do you know about it?
No.
Couchsurfing. And
well, Couchsurfing is surprised Alex, since you're brought up here, you don't know. It's more of a North American thing, yeah. It's basically
an app.
Home sharing in a way.
Yes. And my friends use it to not only find a place to stay in Moscow, but also find some local friends who can show them around Moscow.
So it's more DIY, essentially, isn't it?
Yes.
And for you, the same, Alex?
Yeah, I take advice from my parents mostly because my parents have so much experience traveling, and that's mainly where I decided to travel, and also historical sites. I'm a historic geek, so.
You're a historic geek?
Yeah.
Okay,
I love history.
That's your criteria for selecting destinations?
Yeah, I spent Rome, Italy, Paris, France. Those are the main cities that I visit.
Okay, so for you, let me get it right. For you, it is about, historic sites, and for Jonathan, it's about photography and a sense of purpose, doing some charity work along the way. But I'm now going to focus on, April, your experience of it. I know it's very special what you've done, okay? Yeah. Tell us about your trip to Brazil.
My trip to Brazil, I joined an NGO in Brazil, and I was a volunteer teacher. there for 2 months.
Okay.
During her stay in Brazil, April taught dance to local children.
And what do you take away from that?
I feel that money is so important because especially when you saw the kids, they having no books, no teachers, no resources, but at the same time, money is so insignificant. You can do whatever you want, just you have a dream. I remember the experience I visiting the favela in Brazil. Two of our guides, they are two brothers who are also living in the favela. Although they are very, very poor, but they still manage to work as tourist guides and to use that money to establish a school in the favela for DJs. And at that time, they had already recruited about 15 students.
So life goes on, dream goes on despite poverty.
Yeah, yes.
That must be quite a big step for you, a big leap, for you to go out there all on your own. Why did you do that?
I just want to see what's outside my hometown.
Okay.
Because I want to meet more people, to talk with more people, especially foreigners, and experience different life as much as possible.
What about you, Alex? For April, that's face-to-face with real-life poverty. For you, that's face-to-face with history.
History really shapes the world today.
Sure.
We base our lives today on history, so we try to improve ourselves. So it's good that we visit these historic sites to understand more about the past so we can better the future. That's one of my reasons why. And also I love Michelangelo paintings and like School of Athens, all that stuff is just amazing.
Well, I hear that your parents make you do homework or you voluntarily do homework. Tell me about that.
I would like to know what I'm looking at before I go too, but my parents want me to have an understanding before I walk into a museum,
And I totally agree with Alex's point. He mentioned that he would do the researches before he traveled, and I did that too because when I photograph something, I have to understand their culture when I travel abroad. For example, I travel to Tibet, to Nepal, or countries like in the Southeast Asia. Their cultures, their cultural values or religion are quite different from from Chinese or the Western cultures. To understand their cultural values can really help me to focus on which part, focus on humanities, focus on their the historical sites.
And I suppose you learned photography from, it must be your parents who influenced you.
Yes, my dad,
Your dad.
Inspired this. Me and my father, we always carry a giant backpack full of lens and a lot of photographic equipments, or even we carry a dry box like this big. My dad took me to the Inner Mongolia. It was actually my first trip that I can, jump around, running around with my little DSLR.
So tell me about what travel is to you. I mean, I said earlier in our online survey, we also had most of the overwhelming majority, over 80% of our young respondents said, if they had a gap year or leisure time, they'd like to travel. And the reason for that, most of people say it's to understand the world, to see the world. What is travel to you?
Getting out of the city. And also visiting suburbs, different cultures, landscapes, languages, food, cuisines.
Why do you think it's important to, I suppose one of the difference between the post-90s born generation and the 60s and, 70s born generation, the older generation are more purposeful in life, You get to high school, you go to university, you graduate, find a good job, it's about hitting those milestones in life. Why do you think that your generation seem to have a much more relaxed or much more worldly understanding about what you want in life? You don't seem to be in a rush of going anywhere. You can afford all the leisure of just going around tasting different foods.
Just everything is growing, and you have to grow along with it.
Sure.
Knowledge has to grow along with economic growth. So
you think it's a huge asset to be versatile,
and
to be multicultural,
be more diverse, multicultural.
And I think I became more tolerant and more understanding through the traveling. And I think a 2 months volunteer experience is totally different from spending 2 weeks just traveling.
Oh, that's qualitative difference. It's not just quantitative difference, isn't it?
It's totally different because, I always have a host family and I was constantly communicating with the local people.
Right.
So it can make me understand the local culture and make more great friends to a deeper extent.
For me, traveling is one of my purpose is to widen my breadth of view of the world. 读万卷书，行万里路. So I think maybe in the past generation, they just like focus on the parents make you study hard. They want you to go into a good university and grow up and find a good job and earn a lot of money. But besides that, it's also important to explore the world and reflect on the knowledge you learned in school.
And are your parents supportive of your travel ambitions, your volunteer ambitions, your photography ambitions? Right. Your father, of course.
My father supporting me a lot. Like my past journey to Guizhou in rally, it was my dad. He introduced rally to me, and he asked me whether you are not interested in this program. So my father would not like push me to do anything. He would ask me, do you want to do this, or he would just give some suggestions.
Right.
You could do this. You can go to this school, or do you like it or not?
April, who funded your trip to Brazil then?
Yeah, of course, my parents.
The parents, so they're very supportive.
Yeah, I think it's not very cheap. Actually, they have paid about 60,000 RMB together.
Okay.
And but we are very close. If I have any dream to realize, they will be my biggest supporter.
My parents usually travel with me.
Okay.
Just to make sure I'm safe. Safety is first.
Yeah.
And also, it just makes things more fun.
All of these expeditions and life adventures it requires funding, right? As all of you have found out, it requires money, it requires funding. And as April, you've seen, not every kids of your generation can afford that in developing countries, even in most places in China. What is your understanding about money?
Well, money should be secondary. It shouldn't be primary. And also, it's always good to have an effective way, the most efficient way and less expense way to travel. You don't want to. You want to have a plan where you can visit the most sites, but with the least amount of money.
Through DIY in the trips, something the skill that you are learning.
What money brings is not only the trip itself. It brings us the value more than it seems, than just the value of the money, or like 20,000 kuai for a camera.
I see.
Yeah. Through that camera, I can capture many moments.
I see.
And beautiful scenes.
So it's about what you make of
it.
It's
right. By using that camera, you can create more and more values for just that stack of money.
Well, it's really great to hear your stories. It's been wonderful. Thank you for joining us, Alex and April. Very interesting stories. And we're going to ask Jonathan to stay on for more discussions. But for now, we're going to take a very short break. Don't go anywhere. Join us after this break.
90后, it's just like a representation of your age. There's nothing more than that.
I think, Chinese kids say, okay, my parents should pay for my university education. Okay. My parents should pay for my trip to Brazil if I wanted to go, because I'm exploring the world. I'm being independent.
We see them, we talk to them, but we never really get them. They are like silhouettes of the older generations. When information is exploding, choices exponentially increasing, how can today's youth project themselves as a generation? For a dialogue with the 90s born, tune into Culture Matters on May the 17th and the 24th.
Don't miss the hit American drama Lost, only on ICS. 个云集多位奥斯卡、格莱美、托尼和金球奖得主的黄金团队，一部融合怀旧情怀与时尚巅峰的视觉巨制，爱情、阴谋、惊险、魔幻。5月28日起，经典原版音乐剧《人鬼情未了》登陆上海文化广场。订票电话：62298880，62277115。相信爱。
全新麦等轩系列富含多种维生素，我自有我的魅力。Go 状态 ，Go 姿态，全新麦等轩系列。何必追随？只要出色，打破常规，才是我的时尚。苏菲口袋魔法，不做第二个谁？我就要精彩不停。苏菲口袋魔法，苏菲。
Welcome back to the studio of Culture Matters. So by now, you are all familiar with terms such as the 90后, 80后, the 90s born, 80s born generation. But it's not just in China, though. Other cultures have their own generational stereotypes, too. So in this part of the show, we are going to talk about generation gaps. And joining us on stage now is Alex, a post-90s born entrepreneur in Shanghai, and Elizabeth, who is from the post-80s generation, who now works in consulting. So Alex and Elizabeth, join us on stage. Meet Jonathan. Hello. Hi, Jonathan.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Hi, Alex.
And it's Alex. Alex. Elizabeth, good to have you on the show.
Take a seat. Elizabeth de Gramont is vice president of the consultancy Jigsaw Communispace, where she leads studies in consumer trends. Alex Lee is familiar with youth both in China and abroad. He grew up in a Chinese family in Australia, attended university in the US, and is now starting a business in Shanghai.
I'm going to start with Elizabeth because I know you did, in your line of work as a consultant, you actually did a research into people's travel habits. So tell me about that.
What we've done is we've done a lot of research into Chinese consumers' changing travel habits, and definitely seeing how the young generation travels is a big part of that. So actually I was interested to see that the conversation earlier actually does, validate or bring to life some of the findings that we often have. I think it was April mentioned that there's a big shift in how her parents used to travel, which was primarily with tour groups, versus the way that she wants to travel, which is plan it yourself, more DIY. And a lot of it is because young 90后have been taken already around the world, around China. They're not as worried about, is the food going to be, is there enough Chinese food? Do I understand the language? They're much more open to actually meeting people along the way when they're traveling.
So it's not necessarily that they speak better English. It's not necessarily that they are more affluent. It's the fact that they are more readily acceptable to all of the risks and challenges that traveling might bring.
Yes, I think so. And I think that they don't see it so much as risks. But it's more that the travel is no longer a risk.
Sure.
It's that when they're traveling, they see this as, you know, a key part of building my life experience. The previous generation didn't have as much opportunity and as much security. So they see it more as, you know, I'm sacrificing a lot if I try this. Or when I'm traveling, there's a big risk because, you know, I've heard this before. What if I'm in New Zealand and I get a flat tire and I don't speak English, you know? Whereas the younger generation doesn't see it as a risk because even if I don't speak English, then, you know, I have an app that's going to help me translate, or I can call a friend who speaks English.
I don't know the detailed history, but I know you've worked in Australia and the US, or lived in the US, Australia, and here now you're in Shanghai, starting your own company, your own business. What difference do you see? I mean, obviously you work with young people. What difference do you see across the board? You know, young people here in China, the post-90s generation here and back in the States.
I think young people in Australia, young people in America, they are, you know, they had this worldview, you know, from their parents or from, you know, people who are older than they are. So this is nothing new to them. They already know that they want to travel. It's almost expected from their parents. I have friends from Sweden that says taking a gap year is a tradition. Their parents tell them you have to take a gap year after high school. You can't just go straight to college.
Well, that's true. We talked about this extensively on this show today because we are specifically talking about the post-90s generation here in China because that's something new here in China.
But with the Chinese generation, this is something, you know, completely different. So they are curious, which is a very positive thing. They're curious about the world. They want to get out. They want to see more people, meet more people, see new places. That's great. But the problem, not the problem, but the difference in attitude that I see is that Chinese post-90s generation are a little bit less, have their feet on the ground than the post-80s generation, for example.
Okay. Do you mean that in a good way or a bad way?
I think they think a lot more. They have a lot more personality.
Sure.
But the expectation on them, because they're, being only child, builds up their vision. So they, sometimes they can get into the trap of aiming too high. Okay. Or not aiming in steps.
Okay.
So that's the difference I see. Yeah.
And I would add to that and just say, for the post-90s, their parents, they value things like EQ, creativity, personality, versatility.
Right.
But there's no pathway or no model for that in China yet. So, aside from a few sort of very successful entrepreneurs like Jack Ma, for example, it's very hard to say, how do I actually leverage those talents?
How do I get there?
Exactly.
Right. Jonathan, what do you think about the relationship between yourself or your generation and the parents? Is it important, having a close relationship, being spoiled? How do you balance that independence and dependence?
As a people that is not beyond 18 years old, I have to rely on my parents' financial ability, but in other aspects of life, I could be independent. I can travel independently. I can go out. I can study independently. So I can also live independently, but just like in a relative way of independence.
Understand, yeah.
I think there is a tension in that kind of a delayed responsibility because they've had more chance to explore. Their parents are letting them try out different careers, so they end up actually relying on them financially for a bit longer.
I think, take myself for an example. I grew up in Australia, even though my parents are Chinese. I had my first job as a newspaper boy. That was in 6th grade. The legal working age is 14, but we do a hush-hush. I was 12. So I was delivering papers every morning from 5 a.m. to 7 a.m., and I would go to school. And then after school, I have soccer practice. So by the time I get home, it'll be 6 in the evening, and I'll eat dinner and I'll go to bed. So my parents taught me from a very early age that you are dependent on yourself. If you want pocket money, we're not going to give you anything. You want to buy those, new soccer cleats or something. You go out there, find opportunity, because opportunity is always there. Find the opportunities, meet new people, and then make that money, save up, and then buy them yourself. But I think Chinese post-90s generation lacks the hunger.
Do you think they take it for granted?
I do. I think, Chinese kids say, okay, my parents should pay for my university education. My parents should pay for my trip to Brazil if I wanted to go because I'm exploring the world. I'm being independent. It's something that's positive. So you should pay for me. But
you're saying
I
you
don't
should
think
go
they
one
would be-
step further.
Right. I don't think they will be able to handle if their parents say no to something that is essentially positive for their life. Just because I don't have the money for you to do something, or I don't think it's my place to pay for you to do something that you will enjoy, that it will enrich your life.
90后、80后, it just like a representation of your age. There's nothing more than that because
But
like.
somehow it comes with a little bit of a negative connotation.
But I
though,
think
isn't
that's
it?
just like a bias, or you can just say like a hasty generalization. In a way of interpreting a person. It's like every individual is different. We have like multiple identities. For I can be a 90后. I also can be enthusiastic in photography. I also can be a student, a junior student. Like you can categorize people into many different aspects, and then you just take 90后as a label and take it for granted that you are lazy and you don't appreciate your parents' work, and you don't know how to be independent on financially, or just like living independently. So I think that's like just not true.
It's
to
do that. Too big of a generalization, particularly.
I would add to that in saying that, I asked the other day, I asked a colleague, oh, you're 90后, right? And she said, no, I'm 89. I'm from 1989. I was saying, I mean, really.
I get that most because I was born in 1990, right?
It's like you're a 90 ho, right?
So when they meet me, they're like, "Oh, what year? Are you? 80 what?" Like I'm like, I'm actually post 90. They're like, what? No way,
So in a way, that attests to a sort of common understanding about 90后as a label is somewhat sort of has a negative connotation.
I think because I'm an entrepreneur, so I talk to a lot of investors, and one of the investors actually gave me a really good understanding of what he thought as a post 70s person, what he thought about 90后. So when he asked me how old I was, and I told him I was 1990, he said, "Oh, I really like 90后." He opened up with that sentence, and then he followed up with, "But I think I'm a little bit hesitant when I invest in 90后because they have too much room to back away from. They have too much leeway. They have they have too much cushion
Safety net.
When they are doing entrepreneurial type of work.
You're never a real starving artist in a way.
He asked me, "Are you desperate?" Because we want to invest in people who are desperate, not people who say a week later say, "Oh, you know what? I actually don't want your money because I think it's too hard. So we're gonna quit now." So that's
having a dream and passion is not enough. It's about really having there's no going back.
It's about really dedicating yourself to something and then holding on just long enough for it to become reality.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of contextualized, stereotypes, there are other generational stereotypes in the West too. The millennials. I never quite understood, what is that? The age group. Tell me about the millennials. Which age group are we referring to?
Well, so millennials would be about 1981 to 2000.
Okay.
So it's everything that is 80后, 90后.
So all of us.
Almost 00后, right?
Yeah.
And in the U.S. certainly, marketers and economists talk a lot about the millennials the same way that people talk about the 90后here. You hear stories of parents coming and talking to the college professor and saying, "Why did you give my child a B?" So you hear all these negative stories, but then from the other side, you hear they're willing to wait until they find the perfect job before taking a job. They're willing to live in their parents' basement until their company starts up and becomes, and can become successful. The context the millennials grew up in is very similar to the context, especially the 90后grew up in, which is generally comfortable economically and financially, having access to the internet and access to global information.
I actually think the millennials in the United States are actually facing kind of a different problem from the post-90s in China.
Right.
In China, the entire economy is very positive. Everyone's like looking forward to the future. We have a great future ahead. We're going to go explore the world.
Yes.
But in the West, especially I'm speaking on behalf of my friends, when I was in university or when we just started working, they're worried about paying back their loan because university prices, the tuition prices skyrocketed since their parents' generation. And
it's not a tradition in the U.S. for parents to pay for your college education.
I mean, some parents do. I think a lot of parents do.
It's a tradition if they can afford it.
Yeah, but if they can't afford it, take my school, NYU. I went to NYU. Annual tuition is $70,000 per year now.
Right.
That's a lot of money for a
dollars,
U.S. dollars.
Sure.
For a regular family. So a lot of my friends, they are in a state where they want to chase their dream, but at the same time, they're worried about their loan payment. The aspiration, the excitement for the future isn't there.
I think that's a really good point, and it is different
Very
also
good point, yes.
because the parents of the millennials, actually there are surveys that say that they don't think that their child, the society their child grows up in is going to be better than the one that they grew up in, or that their child is not necessarily going to have more opportunities than they did,
their parent,
which is very, very different from China, because in China it's still quite optimistic.
Well, great. It's been fascinating to hear your stories. Thank you so much, and so well summed up about the generational stereotypes, you like it or not. Okay, we'll take a very short break, but do not go anywhere. We have more discussions coming up after this very short break.
They embrace all different kind of values, and they don't see the conflict like black or white.
It's not just about how parents educate them. It's also about how, like, the overall nation power, like
confidence.
That's right.
Voices, what the country is talking about. News and what people think of it. Clash of opinions.
让原来被掩盖的问题浮现出来。
Fully developed society is when society protects the most vulnerable people.
I'm looking out for my own interests, just like the restaurant is looking out for their own interests.
红包是医患关系的表象，而不是根源。
No matter whose they are, we may not agree, but we do defend to the death your right to say it.
全新果味营养素饮料，水冻乐，每日轻补给，快来体验水冻乐。
I believe in you. You know that I care. All the things you've told me, and all the nights and days I've shared with you, all the tender places.
We design your future.
我今天要和小小鸟行动队一起开展紧急行动，关紧水龙头，关紧水龙头，关紧水龙头，关紧水龙头，你也能做到！耶！
我们的脚步遍布全球，
跟海外路路通去新西兰，
美国加州的克莱蒙城
，New York State，
好莱坞，哥大位于纽约。
我们深入每一所学校。
麻省理工学院
，University of Rochester，
弗吉尼亚大学有2万多名的学生。
我在杜克大学，
在地理位置上，南加大与它也十分的接近。克莱蒙特五校联盟，
每周6晚7点 ，ICS 海外路路通准时登机起航。
早知道他们用立邦专业遮蔽膜，我就不用铺报纸了。搬家具也很小心，我完全没有动手哎。
立邦刷新服务不用你动手，400-821-5757。
I never let you go。
怡泉加 C， 美味加维 C， 遇见更清新。
She is known as the female master of sculpture in China, with her special taste and down-to-earth attitude. she lives the most colorful life. Her name is Shang Jing. At 7:30 p.m. on May 23rd, tune in to Talk to Lei at ICS for her story.
Welcome back to the studio of Culture Matters, where today we are trying to understand the hearts and minds of the 90后, or sometimes 80后also, the post-80s, post-90s generation. And our next two guests are professionals who's done extensive research trying to understand the mindset of particularly the 90后, post-90s generation. So let's welcome Yu Hong from JWT and Lin from Nielsen. Welcome, join me on stage. It's good to have you.
Good to see you.
Ling, Yu Hong. Nice meeting you. Take a seat.
Thank you.
Yu-Hong Lee is Planning Director of J. Walter Thompson Shanghai. She has conducted comprehensive research comparing the post-80s and post-90s generations. Lin Xu is Vice President of Nielsen Greater China. Nielsen's survey on the life attitudes and values of the post-90s generation found the spirit of exploration to be the generation's most important trait.
Okay, welcome. Very nice to have you here. So we, spoke to the 80s and 90s born and heard what they think, but this part is really about your observations and how you analyze these, okay? But before we go any further, we actually want to show you another video because we have been on set out there talking to great many members of the 90后, post-90s generation, trying to understand their mindset. So let's take a look.
我碰到一些就是极限运动，比如滑雪这件东西，在我没有任何经验的情况下，我会直接去尝试，我不会考虑其他的后果。
然后就比如说我选学校的时候，我选的课程是国际课程里面最难的课程。一开始我爸说你可以去找一个简单的课程读，然后出国比较容易，但是我说我就要读这个课程。
我眼中的90后，
我觉得可能只是时代背景的不一样。
他们当中绝大多数人是会。慢慢的成长为这个社会的一些成长为社会的栋梁。
比如说我们经历了一些信息科技的巨变，但是我们每个时代都有自己的责任，所以我觉得就在担当方面，不同的年代应该是一样的。
巨变给我来讲说印象很深的一点，可能会他们很愿意去表达，他们希望表达，有的时候可能他表达的内容，没有被很多大人所接受，就被他一开始他想表达这个内容可能就被压下去了。但他们有这个追求，但他们可能不断的被这种打压性了以后，他们那种表达的欲望就这么就没了。
What do you both think about the 90后 post-90s generation? What's your impression of them?
The key main themes are they're exploring. So we just saw from the video that they're really wanting to try and they're very audacious. And it's like, I don't care about the consequence. I guess the second thing is really that they're very positive in the way that when they encounter any frustration, they just console themselves. They're like, I can let this go. It doesn't really matter. I can afford to be failed and I can do it again, or I'll just try something else.
I would say 1980s are like dreamers.
Right.
And 1990s are doers.
Oh, you think the 90s are doers?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. If you see the video as well, they say, well, the ski, whatever, I just go to try. I don't consider it,
yes,
right?
True, yeah.
Yeah, so if take an example, like 1980s, like Han, I think we all know, it's a very idealistic kind of man.
Right.
And 1990s, for example, like Ma Jiajia, the one just set up a sex toy business on internet. It's just, very bold and just do it. I'm one of 1980s. I remember when I was a child, it's quite simple and relatively poor. On the street, the main traffic is just a bicycle.
Yeah.
And then when we were teenager, 1990s, we see the China, the economy boom and everything become, suddenly people become rich. And like my uncle, my neighbors, they quit the job, start their business, and then suddenly become millionaire. So to us, there's a big dramatic change. We see from we have nothing, we're poor, and then suddenly, become, people can make everything become rich.
Yeah, for the 80s, we can still resonate with that, when China was poor in a way. But the 90s somehow, it's stories for them. They're really detached from that part of the history of China.
That's right. Yeah. So they really grow up in a more better off family.
Yeah.
But economy is definitely one key factor, but the other factor is their parents are actually better educated. So their parents are...
Right, the difference are in the parents,
That's
not
right.
just
So
themselves.
the parenting style is more like, okay, they have the parents who are better educated themselves, who have seen different things, therefore they're more open-minded. So I think I grew up in the ages parents will say, no, 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 don't do this, don't do that. But the post-90s, their parents are more encouraging. They will encourage them to try different things.
They follow each other on social networks,
That's right.
They look at each other's WeChats.
That's right. So I think their education, the parents' education level, and then the way of how they communicate to their children also make this group of post-90 people very confident, willing to take risks, willing to try rather than thinking about the consequence like the 80s.
Maybe for the 80s, just the idea of just taking off on a plane to Kenya and take some wildlife animals photos, just be able to think about that is quite out there, an idea out there. But for the 90s, just thinking about it, that's normal. We grow up with these ambitions, with these adventurous ideas. So it's about doing it.
Yeah. Right. Talking about Kenya, we just interviewed post-90s yesterday for our job, and this young guy had been toured Africa for a year as an NGO member right after school graduation, and so we're asking what makes you take the move that. He's like, haven't you heard about the gap year? Like they're talking about the gap year.
Yeah.
And he's saying, I just want to do something meaningful but also very fulfilling. So I went to poorest country in Africa, spent a whole year with an NGO trying to help the poor locals. And I feel this is very meaningful. But this is a stage of my life now. I'm coming back to the mainstream society and pursue another dream.
Now there is a book say gap year is a must for 1990s.
Yeah, this idea of gap year honestly was never there when we were growing up. No. I think that's a definitive change, isn't it? The idea of gap year. And interestingly, we also put it in this mini survey that we ran on our social network platforms. And earlier we said, if you had a gap year, what would you do? And 81% said, I want to get to know the world. Traveling. Exploration and all that. We talked about that. But what I didn't say earlier is that there's another 40% who actually agree to say that, I think I'm going to do some charity work. So I think, the idea of being able to have a gap year and do some charity work, just for the sake of it, charity work, that's a defining change, isn't it, between the 80s and the 90s, maybe?
True. Actually, to me, 1980s, they seems more rebellious when we were younger.
The 80s are more rebellious.
Seems. It appears like people think they're more rebellious back to 10 years ago.
Right.
And if you remember that time, talk a lot about generation gap, the rebellious 80s. But in fact, I think the 1990s are actually more rebellious.
You think so?
Though they looks like more laid back, more relaxed, more easygoing, but how you define a person is really non-conformist or not. It's about how do they see the mainstream value. 1980s, they still pursuing the mainstream value, like monetary success. It's the main goal. But 1990s,
the traditional route of defining success.
Exactly.
Right.
And 1990s, they think success that is not like equivalent to money, and you can if you do NGO or you are able to travel around the world, that's success as well.
I wouldn't say non-conformist is more rebellious. I think being rebellious or not being non-conformist is actually two different things. So that's at least from our observation. So the post-90s, I think because this is a generation who didn't grow up with parents said no all the time. So they don't feel that they have to do something against their parents or against the society. But on the other hand, they're indeed non-conforming because they don't have to. We will no longer live in a society that has one single value, like everybody has to get onto that.
Yeah. Being rebellious necessarily means there is a positive and negative force, in a way, working against each other.
Yeah.
But for the 90s, we're just born naturally versatile, diverse, flexible.
They're just not. There's no pressure, like a societal pressure for them to conform. So indeed they're more individualistic.
Right.
I'll say rather than rebellious, I'll say they're more individualistic. It's me, right? Me generation.
Yeah, I think this me is a very interesting topic.
Yes.
Because why we see the difference between 80s and 90s and towards the attitude towards parents.
Yeah.
When we did the interview to ask those 90s, like how's your relationship with your parents, they'll use one word. The most commonly used is harmonious.
The 90s.
Yeah, they say I have very harmonious relationship with my parents, and they're like my friends. And then why is that? If you ask, back 10 years, it's talking about generation gap and how to conflict with the parents. It's not, the generation gap doesn't exist now. It's still there, but they find a way to bridge it.
I see.
And so
the generation gaps are just differences. They are not, they're not problems.
Right.
But I think we find the same thing. Like the post-90s, they really value their parents' acknowledgement to them. So rather than the 80s, it's like, I don't care what my parents said. I just want to be myself. But the 90s, they like parents, siblings, like relatives, and their intimate friends are all the people that they really value. I want these people to understand me, to know what I'm talking about. So indeed, like you mentioned, they have a more harmonious relationship with their parents.
So what you described is, this is happening not just in China, everywhere. You move away from more localized traditional mentality to a more globalized liberal mentality in a way. Very much of it facilitated by modern global international economics and communication. That's undeniable at the one hand. On the other hand, I wonder, what is your observation about the 90s, how they feel about traditional Chinese values?
They embrace all different kind of values, and they don't see the conflict like black or white, Western culture, Eastern culture.
Right.
So,
I think it's go back to they're not growing up in coercion, so they actually have a more liberal choice between Chinese, Western, and it's not like they have to choose in between. So I think for them, they actually benefit from both of it. And so, for example, I see young, like post-90s, I saw like a couple of guys like in our office, they can write beautiful Chinese calligraphy.
A lot of them grow up, sometimes the 90s generation, some of them actually grow up learning traditional Chinese.
Because their parents, now value traditional culture even more. So
philosophy, culture.
I think it's not just about how parents educate them. It's also about how, like the overall nation power, like
confidence.
That's right. So the confidence is like as China becomes stronger in the world stage, then they also feel good about, hey, it's nothing to be ashamed about that I'm a Chinese, that I speak Chinese, I know the Chinese culture. It's actually more the other way around. A lot of foreigners are trying to learn Chinese culture, so that really boosts a lot of confidence in them believing in, hey, I have a very deeply rooted culture, and why should I just throw that away?
And we always suggest to our client they should understand the difference between 1980s and 1990s. So if your target audience is maybe 1990s, they should not communicate in the 1980s way. A good example is I used to work for Hunan TV. In 2003, they had a very successful slogan called 想唱就唱, like just sing as you wish, and which very much resonate with the 1980s. I think everybody aware of that slogan. And in 2013, they came to us and say, well, our audience now is mainly 1990s, so what should we communicate with them?
But our audience changed.
Yeah, how can we, what to do? 1980s at that time, back to early 20s, and that time internet is not as popular as today, and so 1980s actually is seeking for a place, a channel to express themselves.
Okay.
所以想唱就唱. Okay. And then 1990s is different. Now, you can write a blog, you can write a Weibo, WeChat, but the point is, who is going to read it? So then we changed the slogan from 想唱就唱 to listen to me.
So it's not just expression, but it's recognition.
Recognition,
Acceptance.
Yeah, exactly.
The 90s changed because China changed. The world has changed. Yeah. The communication method has changed. And their ambition changed. Their confidence has changed. This generation growing up, and some of them are already professionals, young professionals. Very soon, in about another 5 or 10 years, they are going to be a major force in the working force here in China. How do you think these group of people, the 90s, post-90s generation, are going to change the China as we know it?
So first of all, because they're very exploring, because they dare to do and they dare to fail. So I think we will see a lot of innovation and renovation. I heard a beautiful story the other day on the taxi that 2 post-90s just graduated from university, and they gave up the white-collar job in big cities, and they went to a very small village in Sichuan and started to run their own chicken farming business. And so they have the knowledge, so they put the knowledge in how they raise the chicken. So for example, they don't use antibiotics. They put garlic, they grind the garlic and mix the garlic in their food, so that they raise like very healthy chickens, and they already sold 500,000 RMB. They have the ambition, they have the aspiration, and at the same time they have all the tools that help them to be successful. I think the other thing is, I think the post-90s we saw them, they're very mobile. They visited a lot of places. Some people just choose to stay in one place.
Yes.
So because they're more mobile, I think we will increasingly see shrink gap between, let's say, coastal and hinterland, between the north and south, between different city tiers, geographies.
Right.
So information flow just created a more...
I see.
Yeah, more...
That's a much better way for wealth redistribution in China.
Yeah.
Speaking of inequality.
Yeah.
I think they will bring at least 2 different changes to China. First, I think they will bring more diversified value to Chinese society. Right. And on the other hand, they are very pragmatic. They are doers. So they will change the world to a better place by their action. So if we remember in 2008, the Wenchuan earthquake, a lot of younger people, they are actually 1990s, they are there to help people.
We tend to have this hyped understanding about innovation that it has to be high tech, but not necessarily. It's about getting there and actually doing things. Yeah. And these attributes, we agree that the post-90s have. All in all, we think the world is going to be a more harmonious place, more harmonious China with the 90后 post-90s.
Yeah, very positive.
Yu Hongling, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. We hope you've enjoyed our show today, and that's a better look into the hearts and minds of the 90s. But this is only part 1. We have part 2 coming up, so don't go anywhere. Same time next week. And at the same time, just a quick reminder that Culture Matters, we have a book, the best from the past 700 episodes. So if you pass by a bookshop, do look out for that book. And thank you for watching today.
我很感谢自己的父母还有自己的朋友提供给我这个机会去做自己喜欢做的事情，没有那些后顾的忧虑。
其实我知道你们挺辛苦的，但是我一直没有说出来，还是挺感